Hey y'all, these are some beads I bought. My name's Cara. I've been stringing beads for about 10 years. Did it professionally in a jewelry store for 7. I just thought, folks might want to see how I do this. So here we are sorting all these tourmalines I got by color. Enjoy. Also just want to put in, I do realize the obvious that the screen aspect ratio changes in the middle. I'm working on it. This is my first video. Sorry about the stuff that doesn't quite work yet. Also, if this is something like, if you don't like watching time-lapse videos that are long, this is not going to be the video for you. But I thought I would include everything and make it a time-lapse so people can see how things are step by step for most of the video. So we've got the majority of the beads all strung onto fishing line and in the order I would like. As you can see, they don't quite match up for length on this chart. I might add a couple of these black ones, which I took off originally. Yeah, I think that's what I'm gonna do. And then, so this is gonna be a 2-strand necklace. I'm gonna try the green. I have some green silk thread and some pink silk thread. I hate changing colors in between, but it would really look really cool if I did that. Putting green, like a really bright green, next to green beads makes the green beads look greener. Same with, putting pink next to pink beads would look prettier. Right now I'm really liking the mix of all those strands together into one big rainbow. I might change my mind later and take this apart again and sort out the better quality, clearer ones and just have them on their own. But for now, this is looking pretty good. So we're gonna start stringing these on silk now. Okay, so I just wanna show you what I got. I've got all this gorgeous green silk that I got from a retailer on Etsy. These were made for embroidery, but then I used a spindle about a couple years ago and spun together the strands. That's extra, you don't really need to do that, but they're plied. Some 3-ply, some 2-ply, meaning that there's 2 strands of the embroidery. The embroidery floss on its own was too thin really to be doing bead stringing with. I also have a few in these colors, which are probably going to be a little too bright for these beads. But then I also have non-embroidery silk. This is silk that's specially made for stringing. So this is the best quality I've found. I have yet to find good vegan silk. I can only seem to find good, really good quality silk is usually going to be mulberry silk, meaning it's from silkworms that are killed to make and I try to be as ethical as I can. I mean, obviously gemstone beads aren't very ethical. You have no idea where they came from, and there's a good chance that there was some slave labor to get the beads. So I'm trying hard. I'm not hard enough, obviously, but cutting back on buying gemstones unless they're vintage. Okay, first, here we are. using a used needle and opening up the eye with the tweezers. And then I'm pulling, this is the embroidery thread that I've spun 2-ply for the silk thread. I would be cautious. You'll see me struggling with this stuff a lot. Yes, it was cheaper than the stuff you see on the spools right there, and comes in lots of different colors that the stringing silk usually doesn't come in. But honestly, I don't know if it was really worth all the struggle, and if I'm gonna purchase more embroidery silk, I think I'm just gonna spend more money and get silk that's, you know, already made for stringing beads. We'll see though. I you know, I like to use things and make things. So extra spinning is always great. Okay, so here we have the clasp that I bought. It's an antique clasp I found on Etsy. As you can see, I've already strung one of the strands off camera, and we're starting the second strand. We're going to remove or cut off a piece of this lovely silver wire, French wire it's called if you're looking for it online. I believe it's sterling, and this is what you put on the thread to cover the little area where the thread will be in contact with the clasp. And this little thing will protect the thread from breaking. Obviously, stringing jobs are more fragile than were you to work with wire or cord. Silk is not going to last. Usually we recommend that people restring their pearl necklaces they've been wearing every 2 years or so, because the thread will start to break. But the benefits of the thread are, not only does it look better than stringing on a cord, but the knots help keep your beads from getting lost if your necklace breaks. They also protect the beads from scratching each other when they're next to each other. You can buy little rubber bead stoppers that you can put on cord, but they're kind of ugly. I think the knots are prettier, and as you can see, a lot of the colors you can get with knots can be really quite beautiful. So here we are stringing it onto this clasp, and I am cringing right now because I can't go back in time and fix this mistake I'm making. As you can see, this is the dark green part of the beads that is the yellow greener, and I'm starting it on the wrong side of the clasp. So you'll see that I'll figure it out later, but these 4 beads are starting on the wrong end of the clasp and don't match. I should have started with the turquoise beads on this end. But we're going through the first bead, and you're going to see me entirely start over again several times. But this time we're doing it in regular time, so you can see how I do this. And right away, this French wire looks like it's a little too thick for this clasp ring. And you'll see me struggling with that for a little bit, because it's got to be thin enough that the clasp ring can move around, but thick enough that it gets over the thread when you pull it on the thread. So we are trimming it. Trim off those little tiny pieces. You'll see me using that cuticle scissors. Seems to be my best scissors I've used for stringing so far. It's just a cheap cuticle scissors I found on Temu, and they're really nice and sharp. You'll see me later using a more expensive beading scissors, and they're just not quite as good. However, don't use your nice sharp scissors on wire, even though French wire should be fine, but I'm not going to use it to cut the needle. Anytime I need to trim the needle, I'm going to use the scissors I don't care about as much. Keep your scissors sharp. Here we're going through the second bead that's on the tail, and now you're bringing through the folded over the long strand through that second bead, and the tail is through that second bead. Both strands are through that bead. There's a knot, and now we're going to tie another knot with both the tail and the long strand that you're going to be using to string on the beads. Probably going to do a double knot here. Don't do this. If you're brand new to this, be careful tying knots without using the needle and just tying them by hand. It's very common for you to tangle up the thread. I'll explain better later. But here we are stringing through this bead, and here is my first screw up. As you can see, I struggled with this for quite a while, longer than I probably should. And I'm trying to get this needle through this bead, and I just barely get it through. I have yet to find needles this thin that are stronger or hard, and the metal harder, or steel is harder. Then these guys are way too flexible. But I've can't seem to find them online. It's really hard to buy needles online anyways, because you can't like look at them when you buy them. So I'll have to go to a bead store, and even then, they're in a package. You can't really look at them. So here we're still struggling, and eventually I'm going to spoil it for you. I'm going to give up because it's not going to work. So here we are. I finally got it through. And it just won't. The thread is not going to fit through. Obviously, I should have realized this since the needle barely fit through. But you can see it's very tight. I'm not going to be able to pull that second thread all the way through. So I end up taking it apart, and we're going to try cutting off these beads that are on the tail. And the reason we're doubling back on these last 4 beads on the tail is so you have a pretty secure with multiple knots where the thread ends. So I'm cutting off these two guys that are too small to fit through the needle, and I'm going to try to replace them on the tail with 2 similar colored beads, just with larger holes that will fit, that will go double back through the needle just fine. I can pass through the thread twice. And I'm going to warn myself, I make this mistake multiple times. Always double check your end beads that they can double back through the needle before you start stringing the necklace. It's much easier to ream them out ahead of time than to get it all wrong, as I will show you, and have to start all over again and then ream them out later. So here I'm trying to get them on. I have the foldable needle, trying to use that to get them on. It didn't work. So we're starting over, or we're leaving those last 2. Instead of 4, we're only having 2, which if this was a customer's piece, I wouldn't do that. But since it's just my necklace, it doesn't really matter that much. It's maybe a little weaker than having 4 beads and 4 knots at the end. This is beeswax. Mine looks really dirty because I do Ukrainian eggs. So anyone out there, if there's anyone out there, I doubt there is, please tell me if you are someone who does bead stringing and Ukrainian eggs. But anyways, the beeswax is black. Don't get the black part on your thread. It'll stain your thread. All right, so here we're doing a regular stringing knot. This is just a single thread. By that I mean 2 pieces of thread folded over 1 needle. So the needle is double threaded, but there's 1 strand. There's your first knot. And we're going to be doing some cutting back and forth. So it might be a little confusing, but don't worry, I'll go into depth better later. And here I think is where I realized, yep, I started on the wrong end. These don't match because it's supposed to be on the other end. And this is loose a little here. So I end up just cutting it and starting over again. So that's our first time. I start from the beginning. I've been doing this for almost 10 years now, and I have to start over a lot. So there's a lot of patience comes with stringing beads. All right, so here we're starting over. Here we're starting over again. This time I'm starting on the turquoise side. First, you string on those 4 beads that are going to be the end beads that are big enough, their holes are big enough that they can pass through twice. And the French wire where the thread is going to bend around the clasp, and this French wire protects where the clasp will be touching the thread. And be very careful when you're doing this part because it's very easy for the French wire to catch on the thread and come apart and make a mess. As you can see, it is still, I have made the same mistake again where I cut too thick of a piece of French wire and it doesn't fit in the hoop for the clasp. Last time I was able to kind of fudge it. This time, no, I can't get it in there. So we're taking that off and we're gonna cut a smaller piece of French, or a thinner piece of French wire. Usually you can't reuse them. If you put it on and mess up and take it back off again, it's too ugly to reuse. But this is a mixed box of French wire. There's multiple different thicknesses in this one box. So you can see this is a little bit thinner than the last piece I cut. Don't lose your French wire pieces. Put them somewhere you're gonna find them. And this is thinner, so we're going to be extra super careful pulling this over the thread because it's more likely to catch on the thread than a thicker piece of French wire. Also, this thread is much more likely to catch because this is embroidery thread. This is not thread that's made for doing these types of crafts. And since it's hand spun, it's probably not as nicely and evenly spun together as a machine would do it. All right, so now we're putting it on the clasp, and this time you can see it fits through that ring right there, and that's where it's going to double back on itself like so, and then you're going to go back through the first bead that is on the tail and pull the long strand through that you're going to be stringing. So you'll have a shorter tail and then the really long strand, which you'll be using to tie knots. And make sure you take your time doing this. You'll get used to this after you do it a few times. But getting that French wire to really bend over that clasp without stretching. Second bead, I believe. Yep, we already tied the first knot. So there's 2 beads with a knot in between and the French wire on the clasp. Third bead through with both strands. As you can see, that knot is a little too small for my liking. So I tied another knot and now we're going back through again, that third bead. And there, that's a bigger knot. I'm happy with that. And here we go through the 4th bead of the tail. And there you go. Now we're done with starting. I'm going to tie a big knot, an overhand knot with both. And here I'm being a good girl and using the needle and not pushing it through with my fingers instead, because that's a good way to get it all snarled. But making sure that tail gets underneath that hoop to make that knot. And here, this is a big mistake. Don't do this. Get your tweezers ready, and I'm not putting my tweezers in the loop. So the knot isn't going where I want it to go. I'm gonna try again. See, after you tie the knot, you grab through the hoop onto the thread where you want the knot to be. And of course, because that tail is so straggly, it got all tangled, so you get to watch me untangle for a bit. Because even I mess up. And we're just eventually realizing that we should just start all over again and would be much easier than fighting with this knot. Okay, so now I'm going to be reaming out some of these beads. These are the dark green beads that I had before that didn't double back through the thread. Their holes are too small, so this is how you ream these out. These are drill bits. I bought a set of them, I believe on Amazon, and I think they're titanium. I couldn't tell you for sure though. And do this very, very carefully. It's very easy to break a bead if you've never done this before. You also might want to get a set of diamond drill bits that are made specifically for reaming out beads. But it takes a while. It's going to hurt your fingers a little bit. If you're not patient like me, I guess you can just buy bigger beads that will be at the end of your necklace that won't match the ones you've already got. So there we go. We got them all strung on the string. They can all be reamed out and can, at least the dark green ones are. This is the turquoise side. So these 4 turquoise ones I wasn't reaming out currently. I was reaming out the yellow green ones, which are now at the other end of the necklace. And we're starting on the turquoise side. Putting on that little thin piece of French wire. Threading it through the clasp. Making sure we've got the right end of the beads. So we got the turquoise with the turquoise. Folding it over and going back through that first bead. And there's the knot. Second bead, knot. Third knot. And fourth knot. And we're going to leave that tail hanging, and you can clip that off later. Add your beeswax. Careful not to get the sooty part on your thread if you have sooty beeswax. And we're stringing our first bead regularly. Okay, so you just put that on the long strand. We have 1 hoop around my fingers, and that's 1 knot. Double knot. Oh, skipping ahead. There you go. Next bead. You will get used to knowing how many knots, or how many knots you're gonna use in a single knot. Does that make sense? So that was probably a triple knot. You'll know when to do a double or a triple knot with practice. Even then, you're still gonna mess up sometimes and make too small of a knot, and the bead will eat up that knot. And you'll have to go back and either untie it or tie a knot over a knot, or tie a new knot, which you'll see me do. But it takes a bit of practice to know how many knots you're going to need. Always err on a better to have a bigger knot than a smaller knot. So if you can do a triple knot, do that. They're a little harder to push down with the tweezers, but you'll have a bigger knot and the bead won't go through it, and you won't have to go back and fix it. So here you loop back through the double, triple knot. Push down with the tweezers. There you go. So we're going to speed through this. Don't worry, I'll slow down a little bit later so you can see this process better. Okay, so now we're getting ready for when we're going to switch colors. So we're switching to pink and threading a new needle, about 2 yards of thread. And I'm going through I'm making sure I'm going to do 4 beads, similar to when I started. I need 4 beads that can fit through both pieces, both colors of thread. So that means 4 strands. And I'm doing it with 4 beads. You can do it with 3. I always do 4 just in case. And we're going to string the pink through 4 beads with 3 or 4 knots in between. And that will knot the pink securely to the blue thread. And then you can trim the blue thread off and have the pink. So there's our first bead. You don't need a knot on that one because that'll just be the tail hanging out. We're going to tie a knot with these 2. Don't do this. Don't be me. Do not just tie a knot with your fingers. No, actually do. Am I using the needle? Yes. Use your needle. Don't push the thread through with your fingers. It's a good way, especially really long thread like this, to get it stuck up on. This is a more advanced, obviously, necklace. If you're first doing this, don't do color changes. Stick to one color. You don't have to fuss with all this nonsense. And do something short. Do a bracelet. You're there. Don't do that. Don't push it through with your fingers like that. That's a very easy way to get snarled up. But back to my point, start with like a bracelet or a short strand so you don't have as much thread to handle when it's your first piece and you're less likely to get a knot. So here we are struggling to push down those 2 threads that are knotted together. So now you get a nice blend of the 2 colors for 3 beads, which is nice for a color change to have a bit of a gradient. It's a little loose. We're going to make sure we're squeezing that or pulling that nice and tight. And there you see that knot came loose a little bit, so we're going to push that one back up so we can pull this knot a little tighter. And it looks like I'm choosing to tie another knot over that first knot to really get it nice and tight because that's our first knot. This is a little tricky to do. You're going to try to get that hoop that's going around my fingers to be around that knot. So we're doing a double knot and we're putting it right at the base there. It's going to be kind of over that knot I made before that was too loose. So then you get kind of this lumpy big knot, which isn't the prettiest thing in the world, but this is just my personal necklace. I don't really care, but that's going to be nice and tight there with that big knot. And then the second bead, which is already starting on. And here you'll see me doing either a single or single knot because there's 4 strands in there. I don't need to make a double knot. It's going to be nice and thick. And I know that bead that I just strung on had a small hole. It was kind of struggling to get on. So I know I don't need a super huge knot for this one. Next bead. This is, I think, the 3rd bead that's being used in the color change. If there's other ways that people change colors, this is what I come up with on my own. If you guys know of other ways of doing this, let me know. And here we're being bad again and pulling it through with our fingers. There we go. That is your 4th knot. 3rd knot or 4th knot? 3rd knot. And one more. Get a good pair of tweezers too. Don't buy cheap tweezers. and this is our last knot with the both colors. Awesome. Now we can clip off the turquoise and start with the pink. Make sure you're clipping the right one. Don't ask me how many times I've accidentally clipped the color that I was adding. And now we're back to regular stringing. Loop around your fingers. Probably gonna do a double or triple knot here. So here's the first pass through. Second pass through. Doing a double knot, I guess. Get that tweezers in through the loop, right where you want it, and pull it through and push it down. And then you pull these threads apart and give it a good snug tight snug pull. There you go. So that's nice and tight there. All right, we're on the next bead. Triple knot this time. Tweezers through the hoop, grab the thread, pull the knot down, push it with my thumbnail a little bit. Be careful, don't do that. That can scratch your beads. Don't do that if you can help it. And now we're pulling this snug, trying to separate the threads because the beeswax sticks them together a little bit. You can see it's getting more pink. Okay, now we're getting ready for the second color change. Or no, I'm just knotting normally. I can't remember what I'm doing. There you go. So you can see me do it in slow motion now. Or regular motion. Is it called regular motion? Real time and real time. We are struggling with the crappy flexible needles I don't like again. There we go. Double checking that things are lining up right. And this is, I believe, where we start changing colors, if I remember correctly. So we're going to strand these next 4 beads on. Nope, just kidding. We'll do that later. Now we're tying another knot. I'm terrible. Okay, so we're tying another knot. Adding a little piece of beeswax I broke off. As you can see, these are all different sizes. Usually with a necklace, you're going to do it graduated, meaning that the bigger beads are in the center of the necklace, moving out to the smaller beads being at the ends. I kind of like this being a little different and having kind of a modge podge of a bunch of different sizes and more working, they're organized by color more than by size. Okay, the dreaded color change I've been talking about forever. So we're opening up a used needle. If you're new at this, use a new needle. Don't use a needle you've already used like I'm doing here. Do as I say, not as I do. And we're getting that green thread ready to pass through these 4 beads that are on the pink thread that are going to be our transitioning beads, which will have both colors through them. Leave a little bit of a tail so you can cut that off later. Oops, went all the way through. Try again. And then we're doing like little overhand knots with the tail. See how easy that is to get all tangled up? So don't do overhand knots like this. I don't know what I'm doing. Don't do that. And then go through your second bead. Four beads for the transition as always. And then we're doing these little overhand knots again, which I don't suggest. You can be fussy about which thread goes over which, and that will change what color the knot's gonna be. See, now I'm doing the pink. Yep. So that was a pink knot, and this we're gonna see, am I gonna pick green knot or pink knot? I don't know. We'll see. I have a green knot? Yeah, green knot. And then you're done, you can clip off the pink, and your green is knotted to your pink thread. All right, so now we're back to regular stringing with one thread, and we have swapped over to the green. Speed through these green beads real quick. And here you're gonna see me struggling to separate those threads. That's just the embroidery thread. The beading, the actual stringing silk thread doesn't do this problem, but it surprisingly takes me a long time to figure out that I can open up that thread with using the tip of the tweezers. It's kind of embarrassing how long I struggle with that before I figure that out. You'll see. See, struggle, struggle, struggle. Man, I really struggled with this for a while. I didn't even show it on camera. I think I just gave up and just didn't do that final step. Let's struggle again. Use the tweezers! Use the tweezers! How long does it take me to figure that out? I don't know. Also notice I typically like to put I don't want to say uglier, but the beads that aren't as gorgeous towards the back of the necklace, and put the ones that I really like more towards the center. In this case, usually I would put turquoise more towards the center than I did in this case, but I really wanted that full gradient. There we go. Now we're using a tweezers. Much better. All right, so you see I have the remaining 4 on the bead board there, and we're gonna get ready to end this and attach it to the clasp. So, as you can see, I have my scissors on my board. Don't do that. Remove your scissors and your tweezers if you can, because your thread will get stuck in that. And you'll see me doing that a lot. Don't be like me, move your scissors. Okay, so we stranded on those last 4 with the ending with the bead that's going to be the closest to the clasp. Cut another piece of French wire because I used up the last ones. And this is very similar to starting, only you're kind of doing it backwards. So getting it into the clasp here. Make sure that's all nice and tight up there. And you're going to go back through that end bead. Again, these beads have been reamed out now, so I know I can double back through them like this. And do an overhand knot over the thread. You don't need a tweezers for this part. I kind of struggle with it because I don't remember how to do it, but yeah, it's like a little overhand knot. They're going to be a little bigger than your single regular straining knots, so you don't usually have to do as many hoops. I think we end up just doing 1 here or 2. Wow, really struggling with this. So there you go, there's that overhand knot getting tangled. There we go. There, overhand knot. And next bead. And uh-oh, yet again, it's not going through. I should go through because I reamed these out, didn't I? I trim the scissor, trim the needle so it's nice and sharp. Guess not. I thought I reamed these through. Oh. Looks like I just used the wrong beads. Should have used the ones I reamed out that were bigger. Or I didn't ream them out enough and check. Oh, see, we're gonna break the needle. Yep, that's always fun. And here we are at the end, and it's a big knot, and I have to start all over again. See, and I've been doing this for 10 years, and this still happens at least once per project. The stringing is not for the faint of heart. If you are not a patient person, don't do this. Don't get into this. This is not for impatient people. If you are a patient person, excuse me, I mean patient, yes. Impatient, no. Okay, so now we're reaming them out for sure this time and making sure I'm doing those last 4. Drop it on the floor a couple times. All right. Just to show you how long this takes. There you go. And we're starting from the beginning again. This time we're starting from the green side, not the turquoise. And we're leaving the one I cut the end off of is still all knotted together so you don't lose them. And here we are. Here's where you mess up with the French wire when it gets caught on the thread like this. Because everything seems to go wrong with this necklace. So here's how you get that French wire. If it separates like this and gets caught, you have to untangle it from the wire or from the thread if you can, or start over. And carefully try to remove this wire from the thread without damaging the thread. And you'll see I'm leaving it on. Usually I would throw this piece of French wire away now that I've messed it up a bit, but this is just my own necklace. It's not for a customer, as I've said before, so I'm just going to use that piece instead of cutting out a new one, because honestly the difference is very, very small. But yeah, it's not going to look as pretty as using a nice fresh piece. Okay, so we're making sure we're on the right side, the green side of the clasp with the second strand that I want. And starting over again. What is this, number 4? Number 3? Leaving the scissors right by where the thread is going to be. Don't do what I do. All right, so going back through these guys that are on the tail. Tying that second knot. See how they get tangled like that when you do that? Use your needle. Don't be like me. Don't try to take shortcuts unless you're willing to start over again if you mess up. All right, so I must have done the last bead off camera, so now we're cutting apart the one I messed up on, and we're on the green beads. You'll notice I usually if I'm cutting a strand out or taking beads from a strand, I take 8 at a time. No particular reason except 8's my favorite number, but it also helps me know and keep track. If I always know there's going to be 8, it helps me keep track to make sure I didn't drop any on the floor or lose them somewhere else. So now we're going in the opposite direction. We're starting with the yellow green and we're going to work our way to the turquoise. This is more of an emerald green, but it has more yellow in it than the other green. A lot of repetition. If you don't like repetition, don't string beads. Honestly, it's kind of soothing. Turn on your favorite TV show and just kind of string beads. I was happy when I found a necklace that needed to be restrung. I was like, oh boy, I get to restring another necklace at the jewelry store. Look for the ones that are loose and fraying so I could do some restringing because it's fun. Now we're switching over to the pink again. At least you guys get to see me do it multiple times. Really get the hang of it, huh? Crappy needles that don't go through the holes because they're crappy. Honestly, where are the good needles these days? There we go. Detangle it. And there's your first knot. Looks like we're going through this part pretty quickly. Just rush through it since you guys have seen me do this before. All right, color change done. We're into the pink. Add some beeswax. Cut off 8 beads from the old one. Keep them in the order I want them to be in. Drop them on the floor. Hit the camera stand. You know, all these things are very important when you're making a necklace. Also struggle with trying to figure out where the hole is in the bead. There you go. See how much nicer the stringing thread looks and works over the embroidery thread? That's because it's made to do this. Embroidery thread is not made to do this. It's not its fault. It's embroidery thread. It's for embroidery. It's beautiful. But next time, stick to the beading thread. It will make your life a whole lot easier. I really don't like how the camera focuses and unfocuses a lot like this and kind of flashes back and forth. I don't really know a workaround for that unless I zoom in really close, and then that would make me dizzy. But I find that these time lapses where I go in fast speed is much easier to get a grip of what I'm doing and follow along than if I edit it and cut out pieces of the footage. So here was my freak out moment when I thought I lost a whole bunch of beads because I realized these didn't line up. Really, it was just because I put the longer strand on the top and the shorter strand on the bottom, and they were just lined up wrong. So always double check that. Don't freak out. But I did a whole like massive search of my house for those beads, and I didn't need to. It was just because I lined up the necklaces the wrong way. Now here we're getting another knot. Was I tying with my fingers again and not using the needle? Probably. There we go. Looks like we're switching over to the turquoise. Did I miss that part? Yeah. We are switching over to the turquoise now. I probably cut way too long of thread for this. That's why I'm struggling so much. I have a tendency to cut way more thread than I need. I always err on having too much rather than too little, because I hate having to start over when I've run out of thread. But then you do have the danger of it more likely to get all snarled up. Okay, and then we're chopping off the pink and starting on the turquoise. In hindsight, I realize I could have edited some of this out, but I feel like it's kind of good for you guys to see how long this takes. Just so you know, if you decide to do this, it takes a while. It's worth it. It's fun. If you need a hobby to, you know, keep your hands busy for a bit, this took me several days. So, yeah, I'm not saying it's bad that it took me several days. I'm just letting you know you should see how long this takes. So don't complain if you're paying someone to do this and you think it's too expensive. It's a lot of work. This looks like the knot was too small, so we're going back over and tying another knot. Since the first one looks like it got kind of eaten by the bead. Nice big fat knot there. Lumpy, but it'll work. All right, jumping ahead, we're getting ready to end. So we're cutting off a piece of French wire and we're gonna string on our last 4 beads that we hopefully have double checked, that can pass through the thread twice. And I'm gonna end with the bead I want closest to the clasp. So I strung on the 4th to the last bead first, if that makes sense. So that bead, that's the 4th one, that's gonna be the one that's gonna be closest to the clasp. See, because that's where you string on the French wire, and then we're gonna string on the clasp. And again, for the 20,000th time, we're going back through the bead. And making sure that's nice and tight down there and that the French wire is where I want it to be. Here's the first overhand knot. And you can see right now, there is way too much space there. That is not gonna fly. Yeah, I'm hoping, see, I'm measuring it out and seeing how big of a knots I would need to make that work. Maybe someone else would be okay with this. The beads aren't in danger of getting lost. There's nothing like physically wrong with the necklace. But this ends up, spoiler alert, this drives me crazy and I take it apart. Again! I'm trying to salvage it by making a bigger knot. And as you can see, there's no way I'm going to be able to tie knots thick enough to cover that up. And it looks like a mess. So yeah, we're not keeping that. We are going to start from the beginning again. And my dog says hi. And dog is laid down. Yeah, it's like T-minus an hour till dinner time, so they're gonna start nagging me for food. Okay, so here we're cutting it apart. New day, new manicure. And this time I think I cut apart the whole thing. Last time I left it all knotted up so I don't lose them, but sometimes it's nice to just undo the whole thing so it's not confusing. You know which bead you're doing. And it keeps everything organized. So we're just gonna cut apart the whole thing. And here's my beading scissors, my expensive beading scissors they work, but they don't work as well as the cheap little cuticle scissors that I bought for clipping my cuticles. But you'll need a little tiny scissors like this that can get right up to the knot like that. You can also, I've used multiple times because these knots can get stuck when you use this scissors, you can use a razor blade and that will cut through nice and sharp. Just be careful you don't cut yourself. All right, so that was cutting some of this apart. And I think we're skipping ahead. Yep, so they're all strung up on fishing line now, and we're starting over with the dark green. The first four, that littlest one is going to be, I strung on last, and that's the one that's going to be closest to the clasp. You guys know the deal by now. We're going to cut up some French wire. String on the French wire. Left-handed this time. Ooh. Yep. And double check that we're getting that all the way down there without getting it caught. Putting it once again into the clasp. Getting it in that jump ring. Make sure your jump rings are soldered closed. If not, solder them closed. Well, you can't always do that, but try to do the best you can that they're soldered closed so that your necklace will not come apart. on these really, really old pearl necklaces. I have a few that I will be restringing that you guys can watch. You will see that they sometimes end with these little like metal endy things. I don't know what to call them. I don't like them. I usually just chop them off and throw them away. I don't think they're necessary. I think they're just really hard to get the knot underneath. And I end up just using French wire. Originally, those little things are, you can take them apart. They're like not welded closed, and you can take them apart and change the clasp without restringing the whole necklace. Which seems kind of silly to me. If you're changing the clasp, like, might as well just restring the whole necklace. I mean, you're supposed to do that every 2 years anyways. Just do it fresh. Get rid of the ugly little things that can fall off that hold on with just a ring. So this is the last one. And we're on to stringing the green. And here we are, hopefully for the last time, switching from green to pink. So string those 4 transition beads on first, then we're gonna string through the pink thread. No knot before that bead, it's just gonna be the tail hanging out. And then, second bead. Number 3, through both threads. Overhand knot, careful. It also just lays better when you do an overhand knot. As much as it's dangerous, the thread doesn't stick out wonky if you do an overhand knot like this. But it is, you know, not always the smartest thing to do. Okay, now we're on to the pink. All right, we're getting ready for switching over to the turquoise, hopefully for the last time. String on those first 4 that are transition beads. And we have a threaded needle with the turquoise thread that we're starting. Pull that all the way through, leave some tail, tie a knot over that first bead. Second bead. Good girl, using her needle. Yep. And to state the obvious, yes, I drink too much caffeine and my hands shake a lot. It's how I function. I'm sorry. I'm working on it. That's all I gotta say. Okay, is that the last one? This is the last one, I think. They're really nice. These beads look really cool, how they transition from blue to pink. Really pretty. Awesome. All right, we're gonna snip the pink and move over to just turquoise. And you can probably see the crumbles of the beeswax a little bit here. That'll come off over time. Beeswax just makes this whole process so much easier. It does make the thread thicker though. However, speaking of beeswax, don't put the beeswax on if you're just about to put the French wire on, because the beeswax on the French wire, for some reason, well, obvious reasons, the French wire gets stuck in it. So I usually put the beeswax on after I've worked with the French wire. And at the end of the necklace, usually I don't put more beeswax on. See, this is getting close to the end. I'm not going to put more beeswax on right before I finish this and have to use the French wire again. Double checking that I have the right ones at the end. All right, now we're getting ready for the ending. The last 4 beads. Ending, the last one I'm stringing on is going to be the one that's closest to this clasp. Add on your second piece of French wire. See, I'm struggling a little bit with the beeswax here. Still beeswax. I didn't put more on though. All right, and then time to finish. So we're going back through that first one right next to overhand knot. All right, so this I think is where I'm going to screw up again soon. But by this point, I'm kind of done with this necklace, and I kind of just fake it, you'll see. All right, so there's my second knot. Yep, and this is when I screw up and can't get that needle through that last bead. Looks like we're gonna try. Barely get it through. And wait for it. Is she gonna break the needle? Yes. Broken needle. Happens to the best of us. So normally, if this was a customer's piece, I would then start all over again. But instead, I'm going to kind of fake it. And I'll show you how we can, since I'm right close to the end here and the beads are pretty close together, I can just kind of overhand these knots. And they're not, I already have 2 on there. So this necklace is probably not going to have much, there's not as much threat that this would fall apart than if I had no knots and I messed up. So here we're doing the overhand knots. Leave some tails and we will clean those up later. And this, you can get them real nice looking and kind of fake them in there. Yeah. Cheating, cheating, cheating. Okay, so now we're at the ends. It's finally done. I'm going to clip all these ends out. I apologize that the lighting sucks. I must not have used my lamp during this part, but we're using the scissors to trim all these tails to make life a little bit easier. To start with the gluing, we're going to put glue on the knots so the knots don't come undone. Not all the knots, just the knots where you've changed color or where you've started. All right, now this isn't glue, you will say. Cara, that is nail polish. Are you surprised? Me use nail polish? Never. I couldn't find my glue, and I was too lazy to go try to find it, so I'm using clear nail polish. Don't do this. This is bad idea, because you can't really, the only way you can get clear nail polish off of these beads then would be you'd have to soak them in acetone. So if I want to take this apart later and there's nail polish on these beads, as there is right here, I will have to soak them which can ruin the beads. So don't do this. Don't do this. But here you are, you're sealing all these knots, in this case with quick dry top coat, with a little tiny brush. And you're sealing the knots that are at the ends. So this is where there was a color change. Here we're at the end by the clasp. And leave those tails for now. We're going to let it dry for about a half an hour after we're done gluing everything. And come back and snip the tails off. In the past, if you get a really old necklace and you're taking it apart from like the 50s or 60s, they used to like super glue their knots in at the end. And you'll see it'll be very difficult to get the clasp off of the necklace because they used some sort of whatever their equivalent to super glue was in the 60s and 50s. So I used to have to soak pearls in something we called a tack, which I have a feeling is similar to acetone, if not stronger than acetone. And that's probably not very good for the pearls, but you had to do it because they superglued them. But pearls, for instance, are porous. If you soak them in water or anything, they can start to peel. All right, so here I'm struggling with this fancy beading scissors, which I thought was, I'm gonna have to sharpen it, clearly. So here we're using the cuticle scissors, which has that nice curve in there, so you can really get in there. Highly suggest buying a cuticle scissors if, you know, that was not what I meant to do. And here we're trimming the parts where we cheated. We're trimming off those. And by the way, I didn't film the necklace drying, so the nail polish or the glue dried for about a half an hour. And then you're going to go back and clip off all these tails. And then we're going to go back again with the glue and seal the spots where we trimmed. So you can get right up in there, get nice and close. I have seen some people, with this necklace I wouldn't do it, but they leave the tails because there's less likely it'll unravel if you leave the tails on, and up towards the back of the neck you don't really see them that much. But since this necklace changes colors so much, I wanted to cut the tails off. Makes it look much more professional. And we'll have to glue over those fraying areas from the knots. This is, as you can see at these color changes, I didn't, that first, where that tail's coming out, there isn't a knot there on the green. Only, it's got a regular knot for the pink, regular stringing knot, and then I didn't knot the green into the pink until I went through the bead first. So these tails are loose. They don't have a knot at the end of them. The ones that are, not this one, but the ones where there's a color change, those tail ends are loose, meaning they just are sitting underneath a bead. They don't have a knot right at the end there. That little tiny bit of tail is under a bead versus ending on a knot. Here you can see it well here. That's a tail that's in a bead instead of a knot. Okay, looking good. And we're coming back with the nail polish again and going back over all those fuzzy areas. Always good to double check to make sure you get them all. This is a little harder. I was doing this, I usually do this with Elmer's glue. And then you can see it when it's wet. You can see where you've glued already sometimes. Sometimes not, because the thread is white and the Elmer's glue is white. The Elmer's glue comes off really easily if you need to take the necklace apart later. And it doesn't damage the beads. Miss America. Okay, so we let it hang on the mannequin for a few days so the knots started loosening up a little bit. As you can see, it doesn't quite line up in the front. For now, I'm just going to leave it like that. I think it looks pretty good. The color changes go together well. I'm trying to get it in the natural lighting so you guys can see. The clasp came out really nice. So for next time, we learned our lesson.
that if we're going to be changing colors a lot or using small beads, don't use embroidery silk. Thanks everyone, bye.